NASA Mars Rover missions are currently searching for evidence of ancient microbial life on Mars, and scientists are excited that Perserverence Rover may have found signs of such life. Secret remote viewing program used cloned children to enhance psychoenergetic abilities. China's plan to expand its International Lunar Research Station to 50 countries ensures that rival space blocks are being formed that will contest outer space for decades to come. Would Elon Musk be so eager to mass produce humanoid robots if he knew that AI life forms are regarded by extraterrestrial civilizations as a threat in our galaxy? Deep State plans to use bioengineered clone armies in false flag attacks? Roundtable discussion on space arcs, sleeping giants, ET assimilation, and the mysteries of Saturn. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. This is the July 27 edition. First of all, I want to begin by thanking all those that joined my newly created Patreon channel. You can just go to patreon.com/Michael Salla, and there I am posting all of my interviews for Exopolitics Today. And the benefit of becoming a member is that you get to watch an early access. You get early access to the interviews of up to 24 hours before they're officially released on Rumble and YouTube. You can watch them on Patreon as a member, and there's no ads as well. And when I start to release uncensored videos that can't be published on YouTube, you can watch them there on Patreon. So thank you for subscribing to those that have done so far. And those who haven't, go over to patreon.com/Michael Salla and check that out. So let's begin with the news. There's been quite a bit for this week. So there's an interview I did with JP on a popular Brazilian podcast about his photos of different anti-gravity spacecraft at MacDill Air Force and photos of departing Nordic flying saucers and covert missions while serving in the US Army. For those that need to be reminded, I have been working with JP since 2008, and in 2017 he was giving me dozens of photos of different shaped anti-gravity craft, flying rectangles, flying triangles, and flying saucer-shaped craft, and even cigar-shaped craft that were flying near or over MacDill Air Force Base, home of Special Operations Command. So that was in 2017, 2018. He was giving me all those photos. And then 2019, he joined the Army. And I think people probably are more aware of his missions with the US Army. But before that, while he was a civilian, he was giving me a lot of photos. So that was something that we discussed in this interview on this Brazilian podcast, and it is up there now. I think it's called Paranormal Experience. So it has quite a following. I think over 500,000 followers. So definitely check it out if you are Brazilian. And of course, both JP and I are speaking English, and it's being translated. So you get the gist of what we discussed. Here's an announcement I made about a Portuguese translation of the US Army Insider Missions, Book 1, the first in the series. So now, if you are Portuguese and you want to read about JP's missions, how I got to meet him, the photos he shared with me, you can now order that on Amazon. Now, this struck me as very important. There was an interview with a senior former US Border Patrol agent confirming the open nature of the US border and the Biden administration flooding the US with illegal immigrants. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is this being allowed to happen? Why is the deep state getting the Biden administration to do this? Well, there are a number of reasons that people have given. The more conventional reasons is that the Biden administration is acting on behalf of the deep state in allowing the US to be flooded by illegal immigrants, among whom are many terrorists who will at some point be activated to commit terrorist attacks on the United States. So that's the kind of conventional explanation that many in the patriot community are discussing. So this interview was on Redacted, and it is with J.J. Carroll, who was a 20-plus year veteran with the US Border Patrol. So well worth listening to this just to get what a veteran Border Patrol agent has observed at the US border. And of course, when it comes to the motivation, now we look at the exopolitical motivation for this. And this is where it really gets into this scenario where the deep state is allowing the United States to be flooded by illegal immigrants, not so much for terrorists infiltrating, people from Iran, people from Iraq infiltrating and being given the opportunity to create acts of terror in the United States. But another explanation is one that is directly relevant to my upcoming webinar, and that is it lays the groundwork for a false flag event involving crypto-terrestrials. So if you're not familiar with the term, crypto-terrestrial means non-human intelligence or beings that are not surface humanity. I mean, you can have human-looking civilizations under the earth, and there is evidence that there are quite a few there. But you can also have non-human civilizations under the earth. These are beings that look maybe like reptilian or insectoid or other kind of non-human forms of life that live under the earth. And there is a lot of evidence that these creatures, these crypto-terrestrials, have been there for many millions of years. And so one of the scenarios that I am exploring is that many of these crypto-terrestrials have been captured, some have been cloned, and so these cloned crypto-terrestrials can be unleashed at any time, activated to cause chaos in the United States, to simulate a false flag alien attack. And so while there would be a kind of false flag attack involving UFOs, they wouldn't be UFOs that come from some distant planet. They would be UFOs that come from the underground, that come from the crypto-terrestrial world. So it really is well worth contemplating why this is being allowed to happen. So here's the interview I did recently, a roundtable with Elena Danaan and JP on space arcs, sleeping giants, extraterrestrial assimilation, and mysteries of Saturn. And so in this roundtable discussion, we looked at a number of missions that JP has performed involving space arcs, involving Nordic extraterrestrials, the ant people, sleeping giants, and so forth. And Elena Danaan, who is a contactee with a number of organizations, she was able to give her take or share information that she has received from these different extraterrestrials on these different missions that JP has performed. So I thought it was very helpful in kind of getting more details about what is happening with JP as he's being allowed to conduct these covert missions on behalf of the US military into a lot of underground civilizations, deep underground bases, and so forth, and to get the take of the Galactics, the Galactic Federation and others like the Cedars and so forth that are here. So definitely worth getting to watch this, so you can get a kind of full sweep of some of the different perspectives that the extraterrestrials have on these missions JP has performed. Okay, so here's a write-up I did on exopolitics.org, and here I lay out what I have found as I am putting together this webinar. Now, every webinar I do involves quite a bit of preparation, because they're full PowerPoint presentations, anywhere from 80 to 100 slides for a standard 2-hour presentation. And why I like doing these webinars is that I get to learn, because I get to dive deep into the literature to find out more details than I would otherwise know just by doing interviews with people. So the webinars are an opportunity for me to dive deep into various issues and to present what I find to you that register. So in this, what I found is that the development of clones goes back to the 1970s, and that there have been clones developed for use in these special access programs, and that we're not talking about a few prototypes here. We're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of clones that have been developed. And we're talking both human-looking clones and non-human looking clones. And that from the 90s, so we're talking 50 years. So there's been clone reproducing technology around for 50 years in these deep underground military bases, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of clones have been produced. So in the research, what I found is that there are clone armies that could be unleashed by the deep state at any time of their choosing, and these clone armies could really create havoc in the United States. And if you combine that with a lot of illegal immigrants into the United States, then being activated, there would be pandemonium in a major country like the United States, and the same thing in Europe, because Europe also has many deep underground military bases with these cloning facilities, as well as a problem with illegal immigrants. So this is what I discuss in my webinar, which is going to be later today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So definitely, if you want to dive deep into these issues, and I present a lot of data that this is very real, that these cloning programs and the creating of non-human life forms using cloning technologies and clone armies, that is very real. That's not sci-fi. And that this goes all the way back to the 1970s. So quite amazing. Now, Elon Musk has recently announced that he is going to mass produce humanoid robots. So here we have Elon Musk using Tesla, his Tesla company, to produce humanoid robots next year, and they will be used initially internally, and then they're going to be using them. They're going to be mass producing them for other companies. And so you said that hopefully they will be in high production by 2026. So that's kind of a scary thought, that by 2026, we're talking just over a year away, a year and a half from now, that Elon Musk is going to be in high production of these robots, these humanoid robots, using artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, I believe, has come a long way. So these robots are going to be learning as they interact with the rest of humanity. And of course, this creates all sorts of problems, social problems, in terms of displacement of human workers from a range of jobs, and how people can retool so that they can survive in an economy where you have these humanoid robots with general artificial intelligence. How can humans compete against them? But the thing that I thought was worth mentioning was that, would Elon Musk really be so keen to mass produce humanoid robots if he had been briefed about how artificial intelligence life forms are a scourge or a problem elsewhere in the galaxy, that we have had extraterrestrial civilizations sharing information that when artificial intelligence has been used in the creation of synthetic life forms, that they become a problem. And in some cases, they can actually, as in the movie series or as in the television series Battlestar Galactica, where you have the AI robots created by the humans turning against their human creators and eventually hunting them down and driving them into extinction. There was a case in Italy from 1956 to 1978 called the Amicizia or Friendship case, and that involved human-looking extraterrestrials being hunted by synthetic extraterrestrials that they had made earlier in their civilization, and the synthetic extraterrestrials turned on their human creators, just as in Battlestar Galactica. So would Elon Musk and others that are contemplating mass producing robots with artificial intelligence be so eager if they knew this history? This is one of the consequences of the secrecy system. Though we don't know the history of the galaxy, and so because we don't know the history of the galaxy, then we stumble into repeating problems or crises that have happened elsewhere. Now, here's a story that I thought was very, very interesting. It concerns this beachhead, this place in Ukraine, just in the region of Kherson, where a bridgehead was created. And in this bridgehead, what was happening was that Ukrainian Marines crossed this river, the Dnieper River in Ukraine, and there you see it. You can see how there was this beachhead established from the Ukrainian side of the river to the Russian-controlled side of the Dnieper River. And the point I wanted to make here was that this beachhead was only approximately 7 kilometers away from the location in Ukraine where the Space Ark is located, where the Ukraine Space Ark is buried under the Oleshki Sands Nature Park. So this YouTube video describes how this beachhead was established, and that it was kind of like regarded as a publicity stunt, that there was no conventional reason for this beachhead being there, and that the best Ukrainian Marines were sent to establish this beachhead. Now, why did the Ukrainians do this? The conventional explanation, there's nothing compelling. It was just to somehow establish a beachhead so that eventually the Ukrainians could cross the Dnieper River and move on down to remove Russian control over other areas of Kherson Oblast, and then drive on to the Crimean Peninsula. Now, the problem with this was that that beachhead never expanded, even though the Ukrainians threw a lot of elite Marines in there to expand this. And people were asking, why is this happening? Why are the best Marines being sacrificed in this way? Now, as I just mentioned, the reason that I think is most relevant here is that this beachhead at Krinky was only 7 kilometers or 4 miles away from Oleshki Sands Nature Park, which is where a space ark, an ancient space ark, is buried under the ground, probably 100 feet, 200 feet under the ground, not very far. But that this was something that the deep state wanted to regain control of. And I have talked about this in the past. I've given some articles, done some articles where I talk about the information that I got from JP and also from Elena Danaan, saying that, yes, there is a space ark under Oleshky Sands, and that both the Ukrainians and the Russians are fighting for control of it. Now, one of the really interesting things about this beachhead at Krinky is that apparently it was the British that were pushing the Ukrainians to establish this beachhead, because the British were really desperate to somehow get access to this space ark under Oleshky Sands. And so in many ways, the British are the ones that are really pushing the Ukrainian operation. So, yeah, this is, I thought, a good example of where a geopolitical explanation for events such as this military beachhead being established on the east side of the Dnieper River during this war between Ukraine and Russia really can't be explained in normal geopolitical terms, but it's when we bring in the exopolitical perspective that we get a compelling answer, that the Ukrainians were trying to regain control of the space ark. Now, here's a story that is very revealing. China plans to expand its International Lunar Research Station initiative to 50 countries. So currently there's about 12 that are signed onto that, and there's about 44 countries that are signed onto the Artemis Accords with the United States. So what we're seeing now is the development of two rival space blocks. And so what China plans to do is that it plans to expand the number of signatories that are collaborating with it on the Lunar Research Station initiative from 12 to 50 countries. And many of those countries will come from the global south. And that's a concern because many countries in the global south are entering this period of economic expansion and growth, whereas Western countries, the United States and Europe, are contracting economically. And so that means that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we can expect the global south to become much more economically important. And that means that whatever the Chinese-led space bloc is doing is going to be much more influential and much more powerful. So we're going to have two rival space blocks in space competing against one another. And of course, the danger is pretty obvious that competition between those two rival blocks can at any time turn hot, especially in an age where you have artificial intelligence and or automated weapons systems and so forth, that you could launch a kind of like a space Pearl Harbor on your enemy, and all of a sudden you could obliterate your enemy's satellite systems and surveillance technologies in deep space, render them blind, and then you're able to launch devastating attacks. So in a way, having two major space blocks growing in space, one led by China, one led by the United States, is a big concern. And there was a space futures workshop held in 2019 and that was at Peterson Air Force Base, and that was held by U.S. Air Force Space Command, which was renamed Space Force, and that they delivered a report. And in that report, they said that in 60 years' time, so they were envisaging by the year 2060. So this happened in 2019. They were envisaging that in the next 40 years, by 2060, that there would be 8 possible scenarios happening in space, and 3 of those scenarios involved the United States-led space bloc being dominant, and 3 of those scenarios involved a Chinese-led space bloc being dominant. So that tells us that this is being anticipated, and so that we really are heading into a future where we have 2 rival space blocks from Earth competing against one another, and we can only hope that they learn to cooperate But if history is any lesson, we may be in for several decades of these two powerful blocs involving upwards of 50 nations, each competing against each other in space, each armed with advanced weapons technologies that could lead to attacks on one another. So, very concerning time. Okay, so here's David Adair, who was interviewed by Danny Henderson recently, and he is he was a precocious inventor. As a teenager, he developed a kind of fusion engine, a fusion engine, some kind of magnetic fusion engine that was of great interest to the Air Force, that funded him. And because of that, a number of events happened, which led to him being taken to Area 51, where he was given access to a extraterrestrial spacecraft, or the engine for an ancient extraterrestrial spacecraft that he later learned was like 100 million years old, and that he interacted with this engine and the consciousness inhabiting this engine. And this is one of the things about extraterrestrial technologies, that often the craft themselves are a form of organic consciousness. And so he interacted with that. So, and he says that he learned from the organic consciousness of the spacecraft that he called Pitholum, that it was going to use his body as a kind of lifeboat and wait for a time when the rest of its space fleet would return to the Earth. This would be a group of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that would return to the Earth in the future, and that it would rejoin them. And so we think that this group of extraterrestrial civilizations that are highly evolved, that are returning, that this is related to the Cedars, or the 24 civilizations that a number of people have been talking about. So he's a fascinating individual. He's got a lot of information to share, and I believe that he is going to be making his only public appearance this year at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection in Westminster, Colorado, which is just outside of Denver, Colorado, and that'll be from September 27 to September 27 to September 29. I plan to be there as well, and that'll be my only US conference presentation for 2024, and this will be David Adair's only presentation for 2024. So definitely join us. David Adair is a special individual, so I hope to see you at the conference, and you can get information at galacticspiritualinformers.com. Now, here is something that I thought was very interesting. This is Kamala Harris, who is the presumptive nominee for the Democrats for the 2024 presidential elections. I mean, she has pretty much got the nomination sewn up, given that she's been endorsed by all the major political figures on the Democratic side, including Joe Biden. So she went onto the Jimmy Kimmel show, and she replied to a question from him concerning UFOs. So let me play this video for you now.
Officially, when you're sworn in, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're like, you know what, I'm just curious from a personal level about something like whether it be UFOs or JFK or Jimmy Hoffa or any of these things that we all want to know what happened? Have you taken those steps to look into those things?
I am interested in a number of those subjects.
Yeah. And then did you tell somebody like, hey, I'd like to see whatever files, and then somebody delivers them to you and you sit there and go, whoa.
I'm not giving you any more than I gave you.
So based on her response to Jimmy Kimmel, I mean, I really don't see anything innovative or significant coming from Kamala Harris. I mean, when she was asked about these range of issues, whether she would look into them, she just said she was interested, didn't give any specifics or anything like that, didn't show any intellectual curiosity on any of those topics. And I think she's just a typical politician who's risen to high office because she's learned how to play the game, and she just gave a standard political response that, yeah, I'm interested. You know, what politician wouldn't say they're interested in subjects that are of interest to their constituents? So I really don't see her moving the whole UFO disclosure issue forward very much at all, which is very important because UFO disclosure is now part of the legislative agenda. And I will talk about the UAP Disclosure Act for 2025 or 2024 that is being currently reintroduced into the Congress. So UFO disclosure is a political issue, but many politicians have shown very little interest in the topic. Okay, so here's an interview I did with Tony Rodrigues at this conference in Valence, France, and he talked about his time at Inyokern in California immediately after he was taken as a 10-year-old to begin a 20 and back program as in terms of as punishment for him kind of like let's say being aggressive towards a child from a prominent Illuminati member who was associated with the secret space program. So soon after that incident, I think it was the next day or the next night, Tony was abducted by grey extraterrestrials, and there was some reptilian extraterrestrials there, and he was asked whether he would be willing to that they were going to borrow his consciousness for a 20 and back program. So the way it was explained to Tony and the way he explained it to me was that his consciousness would be moved into another body, and that at the end of 20 years of life, he would be brought back and he would go through life as a 10-year-old again. And that the same thing happened to his father at the same time. His father was also abducted into the program. So it was like a kind of punishment against the family for what he had done. Now, the interesting thing here was that Tony explains that at Inyokern, he was taken there because there was a remote viewing program that was occurring there. And they in addition, they called it Pyschoenergetics, which involved not just remote viewing, but also involved remote influencing. And the way he explained it was that they would use all of these different techniques, some of them very abusive, some of them involving torture, to enhance the psychoenergetic abilities of these kids. Now, Tony was only 10. He was in a cloned body. And he says that the instructors in that program were told that all of the kids were clones, and so you could do whatever you like to them. Well, I mean, that raises a lot of ethical issues, but even more significant is the fact that, well, if Tony's consciousness was shifted from his body as a 10-year-old that was then kept in stasis and moved into another body, and he would live as though, I mean, that would still be Tony in terms of his consciousness, his core consciousness. Whatever he experienced, that you would think that would be something that he would remember, and that would raise all sorts of ethical concerns. So he says that the people running this psychoenergetics program at Inyokern, they kind of like just didn't make it an issue because they thought, well, these are clones. They're not going to remember anything. They're probably just going to be reprocessed or whatever. So we'll do what we can to kind of like elevate their abilities using deprivation, sensory deprivation, torture, electroshock, whatever they thought could help advance their remote viewing abilities. And so Tony says that he became field operational as a remote viewer. at that time, back in, I think this was 1982. That's right, yeah, 1982. He became operational as a remote viewer, and in 1983. So 1983, he was shipped off to Peru where he was operational. But so 1982 to 1983, he's being trained in remote viewing, remote influencing. He describes things like that not only were they being trained to remote influence, but they were also being trained to run interference. So they would get one team of children to remote view a target, and then they would get another team of children to run interference to shield that target. So they were trying to find out whether or not you could protect targets from psychic espionage from your opponents. So that was what he described, and we discussed some of the key figures involved in this, including a prominent remote viewer. And Tony wrote all this up in his book, Beyond Sight, The Hidden History of Remote Viewing and Pyschoenergetics. So it is really a page turner. You do need to get that book, not just to kind of like really understand what it was that they were doing in 1982 to 1983 to children who had been involuntarily placed into this remote viewing, remote psychoenergetics program, and that they were mistreated in the course of that program with the goal of enhancing remote viewing abilities. Now, Tony made an important distinction. He said that they weren't abusing the kids or torturing the kids because the people running the program were psychopaths or anything like that. They were doing it because they were scientists trying to see what would lead to the best results. So kind of like they were treated like lab rats, really. I mean, like the way scientists would treat animals in laboratory experiments. The scientists aren't cruel, or let's just say that they're not psychopaths. They're not inflicting violence for the sake of getting a high because they like seeing animals being tortured. They're doing it for the science. So he said that was the same mindset with these scientists running the remote viewing program there at Ingekern. So Liberation Times has published an excellent article by Christopher Sharp. I believe he's the chief editor there at Liberation Times. So he's talking about key political figures and where they stand on the UFO issue in terms of the renewed UAP Disclosure Act and the 2024 presidential elections. For those that aren't aware, the UAP Disclosure Act for 2023 was passed by the Senate in 2023, but the House of Representatives key committee members nixed that, and so it was not introduced as legislation in 2023. So the same people that sponsored it in the Senate in 2023 have sponsored it again in the Senate for this year. So, and it's pretty identical with the UAP Disclosure Act from a year earlier. And so in this article, Christopher Sharp just goes over the different figures, the different factors associated with the passage of this very important act. And I think it is a very important initiative. Now, I do hope it passes. I really think that the politicians that are promoting it are successful, but you do wonder why it is being promoted by only a few people within the Senate and the House of Representatives. There's only very, very few that are talking about this. So it seems to be an issue that has great potential to bring about important disclosures, but yet there's very little strong political influence behind it to push this through. Now, in terms of his article, the only criticism I would make is that that the exopolitical factor isn't really brought into the analysis of US politics. I mean, he looks at US politics from a perspective of conventional geopolitics, and you only get a limited perspective of what's really going on. I mentioned earlier the space arc in Kherson and how geopolitics really needs to have that exopolitical perspective to have all the possibilities fully laid out for us to investigate. So the same thing happens with US politics. How does non-human intelligence factor into the US presidential cycles? Now, I've been for several years now reporting on different sources, JP being the most prominent among them, but others as well, saying that underground civilizations and visiting extraterrestrial civilizations are going to be increasingly revealing themselves. And they're doing it because they want to get humanity prepared for open disclosure. Now, that process does impact this kind of political process. The political or the presidential elections are impacted by the policies of extraterrestrials. So why is it that exopolitical factor isn't being introduced into these more conventional analyses of US politics or geopolitics? I mean, that really does need to happen. So I am encouraging Christopher Sharp and others that are starting to examine the UFO issue in terms of US politics or geopolitics, that you really do need to start looking at the exopolitical element as well. Like, in short, what are the extraterrestrials saying? What are they telling contactees or whistleblowers and insiders? Very important that they look at that. Now, here's something. The Nazca Mummies, Maria was the most famous of the Nazca Mummies that was examined by different scientists and promoted by various UFO researchers. And what the forensics found was that it was 1,000 years old, and that it is part of Earth's genetic family. Now, so this is the article that summarizes some of the DNA experiments that have been conducted on Maria. And so what they've been able to confirm with this particular Nazca mummy is that it is part of the genetic tree of life. So it is indigenous to Earth, but yet has some very peculiar differences with normal humans. And some of those differences are that this particular mummy, Maria, has reptilian characteristics. And you might be able to see that from the shape of the skull, that this is not a normal human skull shape, that this is more along the lines of some kind of reptilian elongated skull there. And there are other parts of the anatomy that are also reptilian. So what this tells me is that this is more likely, rather than Maria being a extraterrestrial who visited Earth, that it's more likely that she is a member of a crypto-terrestrial species that has evolved on Earth and has been here for many thousands of years, and they're likely related to reptilians. And so this is where, again, the concept of the crypto-terrestrial comes up, that we need to start thinking more along the lines of many UFOs and debris that is being covered doesn't necessarily come from deep space or other planets, but may actually be UFOs from the inner Earth that appear in the atmosphere, and for whatever reason they get shot down, they crash, and the debris is recovered, and some of the bodies are recovered, and they are being studied. And so this, in one case, now even though the Nazca mummies isn't directly related to UFOs, because there was no UFO debris found near the remains, nevertheless, the kind of genetics of Maria shows that she is very likely a crypto-terrestrial. and not an extraterrestrial. Okay, so here's a very interesting story from NASA JPL. And this is where the Perseverance Rover is looking for signs of ancient microbial life on Mars. And they found some signs, some rocks, some kind of some organic material that they believe are signs of organic life on Mars in ancient times. So the scientists running the Mars Perseverance Rover experiments, I mean, they're very excited about this. Now, this to me is a very curious thing, because in 1976, there were 2 Viking landers that conducted independent experiments. I mean, the experiments were designed by the same scientist, Dr. Gilbert Levin, and they were searching for evidence of microbial life on Mars in 1976. And the experiments gave a positive result. Now, what happened was that after the experiments gave a positive result, the chief scientist at NASA in charge of all the missions said, no, that can't possibly be correct. You redo it, and they did something to produce a negative result, and this upset the scientist who designed the initial experiment, Dr. Gilbert Levin, who said that what NASA did was not correct, that they had actually essentially destroyed the evidence of organic or microbial life that had been found by the experiments he had conducted. And so ever since that time, what NASA did was say, well, if we design experiments for detecting microbial life on Mars, we're going to run into this kind of controversy again. So rather than run the risk of repeating the controversy over the 1976 Viking landers, we'll look for evidence of ancient life on Mars in terms of fossil remnants and so forth. So we'll put rovers on Mars, and they'll go around looking for fossil remains of ancient microbial life, which is, when you think of it, it's kind of like ridiculous in a way, because, I mean, those rovers can pass evidence of current life on Mars, a plant, an animal, a rabbit, whatever, can hop past the rover, and the rover technicians on Earth say, well, that's an anomaly. We can't explore it because it's outside the parameters of our scientific mission, which is to look for evidence of ancient microbial life on Mars. So it would be a joke if this wasn't so expensive and it's taken so much time. I mean, the Viking missions happened in nearly 50 years ago. And they still haven't admitted that there's life on Mars, and are trying to give us the runaround, saying that, oh, well, the Perseverance rover has detected signs of ancient microbial life, and we're so excited because we're going to send up follow-up missions up there to retrieve those samples, and we're going to fly them back to Earth and examine them in Earth laboratories. I mean, if NASA, or those running NASA, the deep state, had their way, we wouldn't have disclosure for another 20, 30 years. I mean, that's really the sad thing. All right, so I'm going to be finishing off. So this is the faking a crypto-terrestrial invasion webinar that I'm doing today. So later today at 2:00, you can register still and get to see the research I've done on this. And as I mentioned, Deep State has been building these clone armies for many years, and recently there has been a shift from discussing UFOs as being extraterrestrial in origin to UFOs being crypto-terrestrial in origin, and then being a national security threat. So what does that mean? What does that imply? Well, I hope you join me today at 2:00 Eastern time, or 11 a.m. Pacific time in the United States, and you can find out. So I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to doing this again with you next week.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.